us children, we look forward to new Christmas, but then we still look back on old Christmas too. We always hang up our stockings on old Christmas, and plumb till I was 12-year-old.
Many years ago, Christmas Day used to be observed by some people in January. In a 1981 interview, Tennessee folk singers Dee and Delta Hicks described the old Christmas traditions of their family, which included tales of farm animals praying at midnight.
All he could think of was he had a baby of his own, and if it was his baby, he knew that if there was a baby out there, he was going to save her. And so he jumped in without hesitation in that cold water.
On Christmas Eve 1956, a woman jumped from the Shelby Street Bridge into the Cumberland River with a baby in her arms. The man who jumped in to save them was Jack Knox. He would be called a hero afterward, even though he didn't want to be. You'll hear these stories and a lot more on this episode of Nashville Retrospect. Welcome to the Nashville Retrospect podcast. I'm your host, Allen Forkum. I am also the editor and publisher of the Nashville Retrospect, a monthly newspaper full of old news stories from and new essays about Nashville's past. The sulfur water fountain at Worthen Industries on 8th Avenue, the 1949 Rosa Mary Dean murder case, a slave revolt in Williamson County. These are just a few of the stories you'll find in the December 2018 issue of the Nashville Retrospect. Of course, it's also our Christmas issue, so you can see downtown light decorations in 1957. You can read about why Johnny Cash was so disappointed with his 1976 TV Christmas special that he vowed never to do television again. By far my favorite annual Christmas feature is the children's letters to Santa Claus. This year they are from 1907. Along with the expected requests for dolls and toys, the kids 100 years ago also asked for fruit and nuts and even a billy goat. In our letters section, readers share memories about bygone Christmases, including the talking Christmas tree at Harvey's and the Nashville holiday meat tradition called Spiced Round. Here are some more memories.
Good morning. My name is Ed Johnson, and I work for the Kane Sloan Department Store in 1975. One of my favorite memories is walking down Church Street and admiring all the beautiful decorations and all the beautiful Christmas windows that were decorated about this time of the year. Kane Sloan had 6 different windows. Harvey's had 4, and I think Castor Knott had 4 or 6. I can't remember. Have a great day. Appreciate your work. Bye.
This is Diane Hall Wright, and I grew up in Green Hills in the 50s. And Christmas at our house was always special. Daddy put up lights all over the outside of our house and around the lamppost, and even a Santa up on the chimney. And he was 5 feet tall and painted up with his bright red suit, black boots, and white beard and hair. And he also had those big rosy cheeks. And also we loved to go downtown to Centennial Park, seeing the Nativity, and it was just awesome. And the stores, the store windows with the toys and colored lights, that was so exciting. But another special memory was the Christmas parade, and it was sponsored by the Nashville Gas Company. The streets would be lined with people all crowding to see the beautiful floats and bands and horses and, of course, Santa himself. It would start at Natchez Trace, go up Ellison Place all the way to Church Street. That was a special time back then, and I don't think it could ever be repeated.
To see article excerpts and photographs from some of these and other stories, visit our Facebook page. You can pick up the latest issue of the Retrospect for only $1 at local grocery stores and markets. And at NashvilleRetrospect.com, you can order subscriptions and even back issues. Do not forget, the Nashville Retrospect makes a great gift for the nostalgic history lovers in your life. We'll even include a card from you with the first issue of your gift subscription. Whenever I am asked what is the most interesting story I've found in my research of Nashville history, the answer is easy. It was an event that took place on Christmas Eve, 1956. The next morning, Christmas morning, people from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., from Chicago to Honolulu, woke up to read in their newspapers a heart-wrenching story with a Nashville, Tennessee dateline. A bitter repudiation of the traditional Christmas theme of motherhood. That's how one article described what had happened. Another one wrote of a Christmas-sharpened grief so cruel that death in icy waters meant welcome relief from despair. Of course, that wasn't the whole story. It was also one of heroism and of hope, and, some would say, of miracles. Almost 60 years later, it would become a story of reunion. On December 24th, 1956, news photographer Vic Cooley happened to be driving across the Shelby Street Bridge when he noticed a woman walking alone. She was close to the railing and carrying a bundled-up baby. "As I approached in my car," he later wrote, "the wind blew the blanket off the baby, and the woman pushed it back. I knew something just didn't look right. I stopped my car, looked back, and saw her go over. She climbed over the high railing and went off. I ran toward her, but it was too late to do anything. I ran and got my camera and saw her floating down the river. The baby was floating also, face down in the blanket." Today's Shelby Street Bridge is the John Sing and Thawler Pedestrian Bridge. If you stand on it, facing the city and near the eastern bank, you will be close to the Nashville Bridge building. In 1956, it was the Nashville Bridge Company, which, along with bridges and other structures, designed and built ships and barges.
It was a cold and overcast day. If I recall, it was a bit snowed, just a little bit. I don't mean it snowed, but a few flakes.
Harold Hogue is a 92-year-old retired civil engineer who today lives in Memphis. On that Christmas Eve, he was an engineer at the Nashville Bridge Company, working at his drafting table, which had a view of the river and the bridge.
We had to work, the engineering department had to work that day as Christmas Eve because we had a rush job and they thought we needed to get the drawings out, so we had to work that day. We weren't too crazy about that idea, work on Christmas Eve. I've forgotten the project we were working on, but a lot of drawings involved. We made drawings, detailed drawings of, it was probably a bridge. I can't remember what exactly it was.
In the engineering department, Harold had a co-worker named Jack Knox. Jack was a tall, athletic guy who loved football. He had played for West End High School in Nashville and for the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, which is where he met his future wife.
Mm-hmm. And that morning he did not want to go to work because it was Christmas Eve, and it was so cold, and he had, was kind of bitching about it before he left. He said, "I don't know why anybody would make you work on Christmas Eve." And then, of course, later on he would say now he knew why he had to go to work on Christmas Eve, because it was meant for him to be there.
Ann Knox is a retired nurse who today lives in Muncie, Pennsylvania. At the time, she and Jack had been married 2 years, and they had a 15-month-old daughter.
He always called her Miss Boo, Miss Beautiful, but he called her Miss Boo. And he had a habit of, when he liked to get up in the morning, and when he'd get up, he'd always whistle and sing. And he was one of these people that liked to get up early, but he also was very happy when he got up, and he'd whistle and sing, and he would do that to wake her up, I think. And finally he got her awake, so he got her laughing before he left.
When the two men weren't working on the special project that morning, they were likely thinking about the next day and Christmas with their families. At least, they were until about 10 o'clock, when they heard a commotion outside their window.
I could hear people up on the bridge. I said, they're celebrating Christmas, they're just having a good time or something. They kept hollering, and I looked out the window. I couldn't tell what anybody was saying, and I looked out the window and looked up at the bridge, and there were about 3 or 4 people leaning over the rail and pointing to the water down below. Then I looked down at the river, and I saw a woman floating in the river. So I said, "Hey, there's a woman in the river. Let's go. And Jack Knox and I hit the stairs, and we were the first one there. I guess many others came too, but they got there a little bit later than Jack and I.
Newspaper accounts have the height of the bridge ranging from 150 feet to 90 feet. Harold thinks it was closer to 90. Due to recent rains, the Cumberland River was high. So high, in fact, that construction had been stopped on a company project in the river, just off the bank. There, an unfinished pier was sticking out of the water.
When we got there, the lady had found protruding up out of the water some reinforcing bars, and she was holding on to those reinforcing bars and hollering, "Save me, save my baby, save my baby." And the people on the bridge were saying, "There's a baby in there." And so anyway, Jack and us, we looked around and we didn't see anything. It looked like a baby, but there was something blue, looked like cloth or paper or something.
Jack later told Ann that he saw two things floating in the water, and they both looked like blankets. He couldn't tell which one was the baby. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Vic Cooley was snapping pictures. To him and other witnesses, it might have appeared that Jack and Harold and the others on the bank could only stand by and watch helplessly, and, really, who would have blamed them? Freezing water, a swift current, no boats in sight. But that's not what Jack Knox was thinking about.
All he could think of was he had a baby of his own, and if it was his baby, he knew that if there was a baby out there, he was going to save her. And so he jumped in without hesitation in that cold water.
As Jack swam in the frigid water toward the first bundle, he said that he prayed, both that he would reach it in time and that there wasn't really a baby in the river at all.
Fortunately, he said he got to the right bundle. He said that, that was just a miracle. He went to the right one because he could have easily gone to the other one. And if you saw the pictures, you see the two bundles floating in the river that look very much alike.
Jack just jumped in and swam out to the right and picked it up. And for some reason, we don't know why, he was able to stand up right there at that point. And he picked the baby up. He said, "It's the baby." And he said, "I think it's dead." And so I said, "Well, can you bring it back to me?" And he said, "Yeah, I think so, yeah." So he went back in and swam over to the riverbank and handed the baby to me. And I picked it up, and sure enough, it looked dead. I just pitched it on my shoulder, put it on my left shoulder, and there was a riverbank, kind of steep, and I started going up that riverbank, running, of course, trying to get to the first aid at the bottom floor of the Nashville Bridge Company. And soon I heard the baby grunting. I thought, "Oh, she's alive. It's alive."
The Nashville Bridge Company had a medical department, but being a half day of work on a Christmas Eve, Harold didn't think anyone would be there.
I went to the first aid department, and the nurse was there. I don't know why. And that's one thing I can't remember. I can't remember her name. But anyway, she was there, and so she got the baby, got all the wet clothes and everything off her, and put dry blankets around her, and something we saw as a little girl, about 3 months old. Sure enough, it turned out she was just almost exactly 3 months old.
Meanwhile, Jack Knox sat on the bank, still fully clothed down to his shoes, completely drenched and shivering from his ordeal in the river.
While he was sitting there on the bank trying to catch his breath because he was really tired, that he heard somebody said, that the mother who was hanging onto the piling looked like she was slipping off, that he needed to go back out there and get her. And he said at the time, he said, "I'm really tired." He said, "Could somebody else go out and get her?" And they said they couldn't swim. And so he jumped back into the water again.
When I went back, Jack and the woman were out further out in the river where the reinforcing bars were. And he was holding on to the reinforcing bars and her. And I said to another person there, I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well," they said, "Jack, can you rescue the woman? Can you go and get her?" And he said, "No," he said, it's too far and too cold." And then she turned loose the bars. And somebody said, "She turned loose." And Jack just dove back in, went there, got her and swam to the bars and started holding on. That's what happened then.
My son now said when he thinks about it that he thinks the real heroic thing was just that when he went back in the water to get the mother, because he said he already knew by that time how cold it was and how dangerous it was, and that he would turn around and do it again.
Jack Knox had done it again, saving the woman from being swept under the muddy waves of the Cumberland. But now they both were in need of rescue.
There was no rope, no life ring, no boat, there wasn't anything around for a rescue. So he had no choice but just to hold on. But I had designed that pier, so I knew there's a ring of reinforcing bars, but inside that ring you could stand up. It was maybe 2 feet, 3 feet, something like that deep. So I said, Jack, if you can get the bars apart, get in there and hold her up against the bars, it may help a little. So he was able to do that, but he was still in a bunch of trouble.
Even if there had been a boat available, they would have needed someone to pilot it. Fortunately, like the nurse working that Christmas Eve, someone else was there too.
So happened a man named Virgil Johnson, I think. He was in charge of the river boat construction for Nashville Bridge Company. And he just happened to come to work that day, and he saw what is happening, and he realized something needed to be done. He went to the part of the yard where we made the boat, and there was one boat there that they used. It was a fairly good-sized boat, and he was able to start it, and he got a couple of men and motored out to where Jack was, and they got him and brought him to the shore.
In news photographs taken on the riverbank, Harold Hogue and others can be seen unloading the limp, unconscious woman from the boat.
They had an ambulance come, and they took her to the hospital and the baby, but not Jack. I think he found an old baseball uniform and put on, and then he went home, and there's a lady there, I've forgotten her name right now. She had a coat of some kind, and he put her coat around him when he went home. So
newspaper articles would identify the woman as 29-year-old Marguerite Hunt. The baby was her daughter, Judy. The husband and father, Milton Hunt, reportedly rushed into the General Hospital emergency room and screamed, "Are they alive?" When told that his wife and daughter were okay, he gasped and collapsed to the floor. Later, he would tell the police that his wife had threatened to commit suicide on several occasions, and that lately she was convinced that her child was sick, despite the fact that doctors could find nothing wrong with the girl. Reporters on the scene included Larry Brenton of the Nashville Banner. Word of the rescue quickly got back to his office, which happened to be where Jack's father, who was also named Jack Knox, worked as the newspaper's editorial cartoonist.
Well, when he came in, I was not aware of anything that had gone on. And when he walked through the door, I had just gotten a phone call from his dad, because somebody had called the Nashville Banner and told his dad that where Big Jack worked, told him that Jack had saved a woman and a baby that had jumped into the river. And so he called me, and that was all I knew. But he walked in, and he had on a lady's coat, wool coat, and a baseball uniform. And they had some kind of a room upstairs at the bridge company where they had the baseball players, I think, change clothes like a gym locker. And they took him up there, and they found these old baseball uniform for him to put on. But he was a great big guy, and to see him come home in this woman's coat, because the sleeves were up to his elbows. I don't even know how he got it on, because he was like 6'3" and weighed 210 pounds, very athletically built. Mr. Harry Dyer's secretary had brought him home because he had gotten a ride to work that day, and he was shivering. He was so cold. And then he began to tell me a little bit about what had happened.
What had happened on the Shelby Street Bridge would soon be known across the country. The Nashville Banner put the story on the news wire just in time for Christmas Day editions. Headlines read, "Office worker saves mother and baby from river," and Woman Plunges from Bridge with Baby, both rescued. It was a Christmas story like no other, and for most people, that is where the story ended. So let's fast forward 55 years. In 2011, an old friend of Jack Knox named Mike Hudgins contacted me about the story, which I had never heard. I agreed with him that it would be perfect for the Nashville Retrospect newspaper. So, in December of that year, I reprinted the banner's front page coverage of the dramatic rescue, along with photographs and an essay by Mike, in which he heralded the heroics of his friend Jack. And though it was a truly amazing story, it was also an extremely tragic story, one involving an attempted murder-suicide, with a child no less. Mike expressed reluctance to me about publishing the names of the mother and the baby, and I agreed. Despite these measures, soon after the Retrospect newspaper was on the streets, I received a phone call about the story, and it was from the baby herself.
Have you seen the Nashville Retrospect this month?
That is what her friend Karen had said to her.
And I said, no, I hadn't gotten it yet. She said, well, it's about you. And I went, really? And she said, yeah. And so Karen, I was at Karen's. Karen and I ran and got got in the car and ran and got the paper and everything. It was a great story.
Judy Hunt Charest is a retired secretary who today lives in Hermitage, Tennessee. In the phone call, she told me what had happened after that fateful day, how her family had coped with the tragedy, and what had become of her mother. It was a story with still more tragedy.
I was given to my aunt and my uncle, and my aunt is still alive. My uncle's passed away, but I was given custody then to them, and I was with them a couple of years. And then Mom got her custody back, and we went up to Michigan to live with my grandparents for a while because she was still, recovering from that. I mean, once she realized what she had done, that she just, she couldn't forgive herself. And her and my father were having marital problems, but I stayed with her, from then on. I was with her, so.
Her parents understandably chose to shield Judy from the knowledge about what her mother had done, and they went to great lengths to do so.
We normally got the paper every day, but from probably December the 1st until January the 2nd, Mama stopped the paper because she was, the paper would, sometimes run things like, 20 years ago today, that, and she was scared to death that would, come out. And so we didn't get the paper. I thought that was strange, but I didn't read the paper, so, it didn't matter to me.
The Hunts would have another child, Judy's younger brother, Kirk, but the marriage remained troubled, and they eventually divorced. With 2 young kids in the family, I wondered what Christmases were like for them. If they had stopped getting newspapers, did they avoid Christmas altogether?
Christmas was always beautiful in my house. We decorated outside and inside, and there were so many gifts that you couldn't even walk in the living room. Mom was always happy at Christmas. My grandmother was always there at Christmas, and my grandfather. I think that she had some periods during that time that she would go down a little bit, but my grandmother was there to, talk her through it and get her through it. And then my father, Milton Hunt, would come once a year for Christmas. It's the only time I ever saw my father. But when I saw him, he would always sit me on his lap and just hold me. And he didn't really, he loved Kirk and all, and he was, Kirk would show him what all he got for Christmas, and then we'd open what Daddy got us, which it was always something we really, really wanted that Mama told him, So, Mom was okay with him coming, but I found out later, Daddy told me that he had strict instructions not to mention it at all, and not to break down or anything. But he always held me. I mean, up to 15 years old, he would, want to be right there beside me. And I think that was just, his way of getting through Christmas Day and seeing me. And as I look back now, that I can see that was a flag, but I didn't know it happened, so I just thought Daddy missed me a lot, which he probably did too.
Despite these good times, Judy's mother was still seriously ill. Judy would come to understand just how seriously when she was 14 years old.
She had been real sick, again. All my life, Mama was, either happy or she was very, very, very down, because she was bipolar manic depressive, and they didn't know how to treat that. They gave Valium, and they gave for the night, and they gave her speed for the day. It was horrible. And she had been really, really down, and I had baked some brownies. And she kept saying, "Why don't you take some of those over to Aunt BB?" And that was my godmother who lived across the street. And I said, "Nah," I'll just wait till later. And she goes, "No, why don't you do it now?" So I got the brownies ready, in a little plate, and our driveway was kind of long. And I got to the end of the driveway, and God, an angel, I don't know who it was, but something said, "You need to turn around and go back." So I did. I listened, and I came in the back door and looked for Mom, and she wasn't in the den. She wasn't in the living room. She wasn't in my brother's room. I looked in my room. She wasn't there. The bathroom door was open, but her door was shut. So I opened it, and as I did, she was putting a gun to her head. Of course, I just screamed, and she dropped the gun. That was her second attempt, at suicide.
At the time, Judy still did not know about her mother's first attempted suicide, and she wouldn't find out until she was 21 years old, when she was helping her mother prepare for a minor surgery.
She had a benign lump in her breast, and her doctor was her surgeon, and he put her in the hospital. That's, in those days you went in the hospital for 2 or 3 days. They didn't have any time. And she was in the hospital, and she put on a robe, and she marched over to Dr. Lambert's office and said, "I want you to pierce my ears. When you take this out of my breast, I want you to pierce my ears." And he was like, "Okay, Marguerite, we'll do it. Go back to your hospital room." So he called me, and he said, "Are you planning to come to the hospital at all?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, I'm getting ready to go now." And he said, "Well, can you come to my office first?" And I said, "Sure." So I did, and he is the one that told me that he thought Mama was manic depressive. And he told me, he said, "I have a doctor for you, Dr. Bissaline, and she's great." So I said, "Okay."
After consulting with Dr. Abissalan, the doctor agreed to be at the hospital that day for when Judy told her mother about manic depression.
I was standing at the end of the bed, I'll never forget it, and I said, "Mom," I said, "I think you have a disease. It's called manic depression, and I have found a doctor to treat that." And she said, "What do you mean manic depressive?" "I don't need a doctor. I've got a doctor." And I said, "No." I said, "I've got one that I want you to treat." So I brought Dr. Bissaline in, and Mama was terrible to her. And that day is the day that I also found out about the river. She said, "You didn't know I tried to kill you when you were 3 months old." And I looked at her and I said, "No, I didn't know that." And she said, "Well, I did." And I said, "Well, that's why you need Dr. Bissaline. That's why, And she said, "Well, I jumped off the Shelby Street Bridge with you in my arms." And I said, well, okay, Dr. Bissaline needs to, you need to tell all this to Dr. Bissaline. And I was able to keep it together until, I got out of the room. And then I kind of broke down, I was like, what the hell is she talking about? We're both alive. She couldn't have jumped off a bridge. And my grandmother and Dr. Bissaline came. It was a little courtyard where you could eat at at Donaldson Hospital. And so Dr. Bissaline explained to me about manic depression and that Mama was in a psychosis when that happened. She had gone so down, and to give Mom some time, and Mom would tell me the entire story. She said, well, we'll work on that.
In a matter of days, Dr. Bissaline got through to Marguerite, diagnosed her with bipolar manic depression, and began drug treatment and therapy that radically improved Marguerite's life. This was in 1977, when manic depression was not a common diagnosis.
All the other doctors are saying, oh, that's crap, and Dr. Bissaline came in and started treating her, and boom, Mom was great. She'd go down sometimes, but she would call it Dr. Bissaline and they would, adjust her medicines, and she'd be fine. She didn't have to she had shock treatments, early in my life. And, Dr. Bissaline didn't ever have to do any shock treatments. Mom did great.
Despite these improvements, Judy was not willing to wait for her mother to tell her the story of the bridge.
So my best friend, Karen Cloud, her father, Burton Cloud, worked for the Tennessean. So I called Burton, and he was like a second father to me. I called Burton, and I said, Burton, do you know about the bridge? Mama jumping off the bridge. And there was a long pause. And he said, why? And I said, because I know about it, and I want to get in the archives, and I want to see the paper. And he said, who told you? And I said, Mama told me. So I went, and they took me down to the archives, which really was in the basement, And I met Larry Brenton, everybody that worked there when that happened. It was like I was just surrounded by people, and Larry was saying, I was there too, and, it's so good to meet you, and, you're grown up and healthy. So they got me all the papers, and I read all those. And I called my aunt and asked her questions, because, you read the paper, but there's got to be other things, that happened that the paper didn't know about. And I called my father and told him, and he just cried, and he never would talk to me about it. He just couldn't talk about it. After I had done my research and everything, I went to see Dr. Bissaline. And I had copies of everything, and I showed them to her. And she said, how do you feel? And I said, well, I feel grateful. And I said, I feel like it's a miracle. And she said, well, it is, because there's no explanation for why you all really did live. She said, she was scared that I was going to get really upset, but I never did. It was always, I always looked at it as a miracle.
I asked Judy if it was while reading the old newspapers at the Tennessean and Banner archives that she first learned about the man who had jumped in the river to save her.
It was. And I couldn't find him. I knew his dad was an artist, but I couldn't find him. And I looked and I looked and I looked, and I so believe in miracles. I don't believe in coincidences. I was working at a assisted living home. I was the secretary, and I was also the greeter, anybody that came in. And one of our residents was standing right there at my office, and she's talking to this lady, and she said, Jack Knox. And I just went, did she just say Jack Knox? So I went out there and I asked her, I said, do you know Jack Knox? And she said, yes. I said, do you know if he rescued a baby? She said, yeah. She said, from the Cumberland River. And I said, I need to talk to him. I'm that baby. And she gave me his number. And I called him and we talked. And he was sick, at that time. But he was just, so glad that, was alive and healthy. And he didn't consider himself a hero. He said, I did what I had to do. He said, and I'm glad that both of you all survived. And he asked about Mom, and I told him. And, he was very humble about it, very sweet. So, I got to talk to Jack, and so it was great.
Ann Knox also remembers the day that Judy called Jack.
The only thing he said that day, I said, who was that on the phone? Because I could hear him in his office talking to somebody. And he said, oh, that was little Judy, the baby. And he said, sounds like she's doing all right. And he was just pleased that she had a good life. But he never tried to get in touch with her because he didn't, he just thought it would be terribly painful to bring it up.
Jack Knox did not want any accolades for what he did, but they came nonetheless. In 2005, Jack was inducted into the Citadel's Arlen D. Williams Society, which recognizes graduates who have taken brave actions for the benefit of others.
Of course, he was thrilled that the Citadel would recognize him, but he did not want any of that to happen. In fact, he didn't want me to invite our grown children to the event because he said that was back in the old days. He said, it's not something that just happened. And he said, I don't really need this, but I think he was very honored that the Citadel was going to give him a parade because he loved the bagpipes and he loved the parades. So I think he was very honored, but it wasn't something that he wanted or something that he told my older children not to come because that's just the kind of person he was.
10 days later, on November 22nd, 2005, Jack Knox died of a blood clot while still in Charleston.
I have to say that I was blessed with many good memories and a wonderful married life for 52 years and 3 wonderful children and 7 great grandchildren. He was a deeply spiritual person. He was very passionate about the things he loved. Like he loved God, he loved his country, he loved his family, and he loved football. And any one of those things, he was so passionate about all of them. And he was one of these people that he liked to win, but he thought if you lost, you should shake the person's hand and tell them they played a good game. And he was very adamant about teaching our children that. I'm sorry you didn't get to meet Jack because he was one of the good guys.
Judy didn't get to meet Jack Knox either, and it would seem that the story had ended yet again. It hadn't. Years later, Judy would learn about another of her rescuers. Though Harold Hogue had lost contact with his friend Jack Knox over the decades, he had not forgotten about the baby. Harold would occasionally retell the story at Christmas and wonder what became of her. The problem was that he didn't even know her name. But in July 2015, he caught a break, thanks to modern technology and the younger generation.
My son had a birthday, and he had his son, who lived in Knoxville, come down for that birthday, and he wanted to hear the story. So I told Michael, that's his name, Dave's son, I told him the story. And while I was telling the story, Michael was with his thumbs and all the telephone, and I thought he didn't even pay attention. But then he said, Pop, that's what he called me, Pop. He said the lady's name was Marguerite and the baby's name was Judy and the last name was Hunt. He had found it in a paper, some paper from Pennsylvania.
Finally having the names of the mother and the baby, Harold's daughter-in-law, Sheri Hogue, continued the detective work from Memphis. While searching online, she found the obituary for Judy's mother, who had died in March 2015, just a few months earlier. In the obituary, it mentioned Judy's married name, which led Sheri to Judy's phone number.
I was sitting in my living room, and I was so down. I just, I was still grieving from Mom, and I was just kind of sitting there. The TV was on, but I really wasn't watching it, and I was just sitting there. And the phone rang, and didn't know who the number was, but I decided to answer it. And this woman said, "Is this Judy Hunt?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And when anybody says Judy Hunt, I know it's about the river. And so she said, "My name is Harold Hogue, and I am the daughter-in-law of one of the men that saved you." And I said, "Mr. Knox saved me." She said, "Well, yes, that's true. But when he saved you, he brought you to my father-in-law. Mr. Hogue was one of the people that saved me." And I said, and she told me how and everything, and I just couldn't believe it. I just, I was just like, I was in shock, and that he was alive. So she said, "He really wants to see you. Could we come?" And I said, "Sure, you can come."
And so Harold and his wife, son, and sister-in-law all traveled from Memphis to Nashville to meet the baby.
I was on cloud nine. I was like, I'm going to get to meet one of the men and so I was really, excited. And the day came, and they were going to get there about 1 o'clock. And I'm going to tell you, that was the longest morning. I got dressed, and I was, everything was good in the house, and, it took forever. And then finally they came. And I opened the door, and he just came up to me and just put his arms around me and hugged me. And it was so familiar. People say, "Oh, that's crazy, Judy." It's not. Every time he hugs me, I feel him. And I can feel his hugs now. But that first hug was unbelievable. Because I knew I had been right there before.
I asked Harold what it was like to finally see Judy again.
That was emotional. It really was. To think it had been 59 years, I think it's right, something like that. 59 years. Whew.
He had written a letter for me, that explained things. And, we talked and hugged, and, I think they were there about 3 hours, and, of course, I didn't want him to leave, I wanted him to stay, but, we just clicked. I call him Pop now, he still calls me baby, but I call him Pop, and, it's just a wonderful relationship. Again, there was a miracle.
Judy's house wasn't Harold's only stop on that trip to Nashville. I got a phone call from a friend who worked for the Cumberland River Compact, whose offices happened to be in the Nashville Bridge building. My friend told me that Harold Hogue and his family were visiting his old workplace. I immediately grabbed copies of the retrospect with the rescue story and headed to meet them. It was then that plans for another reunion were made. I was already scheduled to give a presentation at the Compact about stories pertaining to the Cumberland River that I had found in my research. Of course, the story of the rescue was going to be the main one, because the presentation would take place on the very site at which the rescue occurred. The Hogues agreed to return, and Judy was to be there too. On September 16th, 2015, almost 60 years since they had last been there together, Harold Hogue and Judy Hunt Charest met again at the place that had so affected their lives. After my talk, the crowd witnessed a wonderful moment when Judy presented Harold with a gift.
I wanted to give him something that had to do with time, because it took such a long time for us to come together. And I thought, I'll get him a pocket watch. So I had on the back, I had it engraved. It said, "Everybody needs a hero, and you're mine." And I gave it to him, and he loves it. He loves it.
I was very proud to have been there that day and see those two together again at that place. I made sure to take a special photo of them. In the background, you can see the bridge and the Nashville Bridge building and the pier, which is still there today, the same pier that Harold designed, the same pier Marguerite and Jack had held on to for their lives. In reprinting this amazing 1956 story, I could never have imagined where it would lead. While talking about her mother's final years, Judy told me something about our articles that I hadn't heard before.
She was alive when you all did the first story. So I asked Mom, I said, do you want to read it? You don't have to. I just want you to know it's out there and, it's out there. And she said, I think I'd like to read it. So she did, and she cried a little bit here and there. At the end of it, she stopped, and she looked at me, and she said, it really was a miracle, wasn't it? I said, yeah, it was. And that, I think, is when she began to forgive herself. And she was able to talk about it pretty freely about a year before she died. And I think that she finally came to peace with it.
The obituary for Marguerite Hunt Schultz said that she worked for Genesco for 23 years and that she had a kind and generous heart. Judy was by her side the night she died.
Mom was a great lady. I mean, she really was. She was awesome. We loved her. Kirk and I just, we're a very small family. It was just her, Kirk, and I. And I think God knew that, Mom would do great things as a mother and as a grandmother. She was an awesome grandmother.
Judy considers both Jack and Harold her heroes. Since she didn't get to know Jack personally, she has seen to it that Harold has received some accolades, including a Tennessee Senate resolution recognizing his act of heroism. She also helped with a song written about that morning on the bridge. But Ann Knox said Jack would not have wanted any more attention for what he did. He didn't consider himself a hero.
I know that he would not be happy if he thought they were going to keep running this story over and over and over again. I'm sure he's probably turned over in his grave 2 or 3 times because that just was not who he was. He just, he didn't want those accolades. He never wanted them. Now, when he was playing football, that was a different story.
Judy has her own reasons for continuing to talk about that Christmas Eve. I asked her if she ever gets tired of telling the story.
No. I never get tired. It's a story so full of miracles. And it also is a story about my mom was so sick. She was bipolar manic. And I want people to know, and women especially, to know that happens after birth. And, you don't have to go that far. There is help out there. And don't be afraid to get that help. So, there's a lot of factors in this one story, but I think the biggest is just the miracle. The angels that saved me, the human angels. So I never get tired of telling it.
Our thanks to Ann Knox, Harold Hogue, and Judy Hunt Charest for the interviews. Thanks also to Mike Hudgins and Sheri Hogue for their invaluable assistance. You may not have realized it, but all these years you've been celebrating New Christmas every December 25th. But there used to be another Christmas on a different date. In 1582, Pope Gregory VIII abandoned the Julian calendar system, which was too long, and adopted one that more accurately matched the Earth's orbit around the sun. For people who insisted on sticking with the old Julian calendar, Christmas began falling in January instead of December, and they called it Old Christmas. The confusing controversy came to the New World with the Pilgrims, and the tradition continued for decades in some rural areas of the American South. An article in the Nashville American from January 1907 said, "There are still a goodly number of devout persons in the mountains of Georgia, the 2 Carolinas, Tennessee, and Kentucky to whom the real Christmas does not come until January 6th. That is Old Christmas, the day on the midnight of which the cows get down on all fours, and the sheep and the goats make obeisances and are supposed to be saying their prayers."
You celebrated Old Christmas when you were growing up?
Not much, I didn't. They had sewed that down then, a lot of it. But Dad and Mother used to celebrate it.
And why didn't you celebrate it too much?
I don't know. We got in on a new Christmas, they called it. And Dad and Mother would bank on that because everybody else did that night. And us children, we look forward to a new Christmas. But then we still look back on old Christmas too.
D. Hicks was a folk singer from Fentress County, Tennessee. He was interviewed a number of times by State Park Manager Bob Fulcher as part of the Tennessee State Park's Folklife project. Records of the project, which are still being expanded, are held at the Tennessee State Library and Archives. Fulcher interviewed many mountain people to record their traditions and way of life. You can hear some of the songs and oral histories he collected online at Tennessee Virtual Archive. In this 1981 interview, Fulcher and an assistant asked D. Hicks and his wife, Delta, what they remembered about Old Christmas. D. was 75 at the time of the interview.
We always hang up our stockings on Old Christmas and New Year's, plumb till I was 12-year-old. We all thought old Santa Claus, you know. That's what we was taught, and that they would he'd bring stuff and put in the children's socks.
What kind of things did you get in your stockings?
Well, we principally got apples and oranges and candy and stuff like that. There wasn't no toys, hardly at all.
Your stockings were socks?
Yeah, they were socks, knit out of yarn that Mother would knit for us.
Were they those stockings used especially for Christmas time? Or?
Yeah, and to wear all winter.
And what day did you say Old Christmas was?
The 6th of January.
And what did you call that?
Old Epiphany is what the old people called it.
Did you have a Christmas tree then?
And no. Now sometimes Sister Lou, before she married, she would leave the first and up till after Old Christmas.
But you'd get a Christmas tree for a new Christmas.
Yeah.
Well, did people exchange gifts then, or was it just what you got?
No, not hardly ever. There wasn't that gift business hadn't got started then.
So when you were little, you believed in Santa?
Oh, yeah.
What kind of things did your parents tell you about him?
Yeah, they just said that old Santa Claus would be around Christmas time.
What did Santa Claus look like?
Oh, they nearly always somebody played old Santa Claus of Christmas Eve night.
Oh, really?
They have a false face, you know, like old Santa Claus, like they've got now. It'd be some of the folks that'd play him.
Okay,
Oh, it'd scare us children half to death.
When he came, what did he do?
Yeah, he just come to the door and holler hello, and if the children had been good or mean.
As for the farm animals praying at midnight on Christmas Day, Delta Hicks had some common sense observations.
I heard them talk about it. They said at midnight, well, you know, at midnight anyhow, I guess they do every night. At midnight, a cowbird will be on its knees. He'll lay down, then at midnight he gets up. And then when he goes back down again, hits down on his knees again. I have seen him do that. I've been up of a night.
At midnight,
Yeah, at midnight you'll go to a barn where there's cattle or in a field or anywhere, and they'll be up. They'll get up and stir around and maybe eat some and drink or whatever. Then they get ready to lay back down while they go down on their knees first and then draw their hind legs around. So I guess probably they got the saying from that. They just say them old cattle's down there praying or thinking for Christmas because they had something to eat and wasn't hungry, you know, it's happy for Christmas time.
It was something that they did on Christmas?
That's what the old folks used to say, that this cattle got on their knees at Christmas time. Of course they did, because they do.
It was also said that if you witnessed the midnight praying, you risked hearing the animals speak of your impending death. Other traditions, including noise-making and pranks, make Old Christmas reminiscent more of Halloween than of the Christmas we know today. Delta Hicks died in 1996 and D. Hicks died in 1983, 2 years after the interview. Be sure to stay tuned after the end of this episode to hear D. Hicks sing an old Christmas song. A special thanks to Lori Lockhart of the Tennessee State Library and Archives and to Bob Fulcher at Cumberland Trail for lending their expertise regarding these audio artifacts. Thank you for listening to this episode of Nashville Retrospect. For more information about the stories you heard, including photographs, see the show notes on the podcast webpage, which you can find a link to at nashvilleretrospect.com. You can also email your comments and suggestions to nashretroshow@gmail.com. This show was written and produced by me, Allen Forkum. Stay tuned for the next one. And in the meantime, don't forget to pick up your copy of the Nashville Retrospect.
The sleigh song, whatever it was, I forgot now.
Up and down the snowy
Up and down the snowy dale.
Dale.
That's cool.
What's the
Christmas.
sleigh song?
That's that and that. How does it go, Dad? What's that sleigh bell? Listen to the sleigh bells.
Honey, I don't know whether I can
Listen to
say.
the sleigh bells ring.
Up the hills and all down the snowy dales, oh, the echo rings of the Christmas bells. Bring pine and fir to rake, wave the garland bright, for glad is the temple, ooh, of the King tonight. Christmas is here, fill it with cheer, make it a joyful and a glad new year. 'Cause angel songs in our hearts may sound again, crying peace on earth and goodwill to man.